Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Game Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burridge, and with me today is Bruce Grove. Welcome to the podcast, Bruce.
Thank you, Joe. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and likewise, I'm really looking forward to diving into the chat, just because the amount of interesting companies and stuff that you've achieved throughout your careers is fascinating. So can't wait to dive in. But for all of the listeners today that have no idea who you are, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Joe. I'm Bruce Grove. I'm the CTO for Avantis Education. We are the world's largest VR company that you've never heard of. In K-12 education all around the world, we're a global company founded in Gloucester about 15 years ago. And alongside that, I'm also a consultant in games and game adjacent technologies. So I help startups advising and mentoring and getting them into their sort of starts of their journeys as they go through into whichever path they're going to take.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really funny you say like the biggest VR company you never heard of. I run a local games industry group here. I live in near Exeter in Devon in the southwest of England. And I had a couple of people doing talks last time, and it was really interesting to see there was one talk focused on education in VR. And in fact, most of the people in that company come from games, but they were taking all of that learning and applying it to pretty much every industry you can imagine that needs some sort of training or education or something. And I just thought that was fascinating. And being at Epic, I saw the Unreal Engine team expand into even more and more areas that weren't games or film or VFX. That's great. Glad to Britain highlighting that area that, like you said, many people aren't aware of. But yeah, hey, we're here to talk about games. So I'd love to know what are you playing right now?
What am I playing right now? So I have, certainly on my phone, my battery is being burned up by Balatro, like I think so many people. You start it, and once you get going, you suddenly realize your phone lasts about a quarter of the time that you're normally used to. On console, I actually went back to Dave the Diver. Funnily enough, I started Dave the Diver when it came out, and I couldn't get into it for some reason at the time. And I needed kind of a palate cleanser. I just sort of finished Indiana Jones. I went into Echoes of Wisdom. They're both amazing, but they're huge, huge games. And I needed something just to sort of play around a little bit with. And I went back to Dave the Diver, and I'm suddenly loving it again. And so that's sort of where I'm going to at the moment. But last night I actually installed Last of Us 2 because I want to see if I can. Never got round to playing that. I played all the way through the first one a couple of times, and I want to get through it before the season launches and it's on TV. So I don't want any spoilers. I want to go straight into the game now.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I play video games all the time, but there's only a certain amount of time that you have for these things. So I'm always so ashamed of the amount of big hits and successes I actually haven't managed to get to yet. Never played the Last of Us games.
Yeah.
Also haven't played Dave the Diver either. Watched, plenty. I tend to watch plenty of video and stuff on YouTube. I've actually purposely stayed away from The Last of Us because I tried to avoid spoilers and stuff. I'm like, okay, I'll get to it one day.
Yeah.
Anyone who's been listening to this podcast for a while, I talk about Balatro actually quite a bit. So I've even got a physical deck of Balatro somewhere off to the side.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, there's a Dave the Diver Balatro crossover.
Yeah.
So you can play Balatro in Dave the Diver. It's just like, oh my God. And now there's a Dave the Diver deck in Balatro if you're playing the core game.
Oh, I knew the crossover, like as in the Dave the Diver cards in Balatro, like along with like The Witcher and other things. But I didn't realize there was like now you could actually play that game in that game. There's so many different levels of meta going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, I'll add it to my ever expanding list. But that's great. Thank you. Okay, so going back to your career, I'd love to know like how you got into the games industry originally, because I know that you started in Sun Microsystems, right? In the right in the heart of Silicon Valley. So I'd love to hear that story.
Sure. So even before that, I mean, I was, and I think like many people of sort of my age demographic, I started like building my own games, building my own machines. So I started very early on, built an Acorn Atom at the time, and then went through that time of ZX81s and Spectrums, and that sort of beginning to understand how software worked, how games worked. And then I went off and became a systems engineer. And right at the beginning of my career, I was working on flight simulators for British Aerospace with silicon graphics systems. And so these were at the time the most powerful graphics machines on the planet. They were incredible systems. And you felt like you were flying. And this was sort of back in the early 90s. And all of that took me into sort of the journey where I was suddenly working for a small company that got acquired by Sun Microsystems. And we were the first engineering team outside of Silicon Valley that Sun, or outside of the US, I should say, that Sun had ever acquired. And so I got put on the team that was to work through the integration of how we were going to work with this incredible, huge sort of storied company. I mean, at the time, this was sort of the dot-com era. Sun is one of the top companies in the world. It's right at the top of the Fortune 100. And we'd been acquired by them with this small but very sort of niche, strong engineering team out here in the UK. And we were starting to work with that team on the operating system side in Menlo Park. So I ended up traveling backwards and forwards a lot. And I remember I ended up doing an extended stint in, I think it was 1999. I was over there for about 3.5 months. And I came back from that stint saying, if I ever talk about moving to California, just remind me it's a bad idea. It's so insane. It's so intense out there. And I was back as still moving forward with this integration work. And I went back the following year, around about March time, and big presentation to all the senior execs. And we got into a bit of a heated discussion about some of the work we were trying to do and how we were trying to put it into the operating system. And so there was some big disagreements, and I finally got told to take it outside with one of the senior directors at the time. And so we went back up to her office, and she sat me down, and I'm this sort of snotty little developer from the UK, and she's running a huge part of Sun Solaris organization. She just looked at me and she went, "Do you want to work for me?" And I went, "What? Do you want to work for me? I'm serious. I got a team here. It needs leadership. I need someone like you that can stand up in a room like that and can take on these kinds of things." She said, "I know what you're saying. We can work on your approach to how you present things. We get it. But I need people like you on my team." And I remember flying back, and this was just sort of end of March, beginning of April. It's like, I've been offered a job in Silicon Valley. I can't be that person that says no to that. And so 2 months later, house is sold, furniture's packed, everything's put on a boat. And I moved out to Sun Microsystems, and that became the part of more. I remember saying I'm going to go out for a couple of years, no more than that. And more than a decade later, before I actually came back home, it was with multiple moves. Once I'd got out there, I also spent some time in Austin, in Texas. And so it just became the really sort of the launch point for me in my career.
That's incredible. But I guess that wasn't quite in the game space, right? So,
no.
So there was still a leap to be done over into there.
There was. So I was working in cloud infrastructure before it was cloud. So it was all data infrastructure, data center infrastructure. And we were doing a lot of work with remote rendering and graphics work. And I got got a little bit, felt like I'd been at Sun for too long. So I went and joined this company called Tell Me, and Tell Me really sort of became very influential in the next stages of my career, particularly because of how they built the team. And it was a very sort of deep technical company that was really building the first natural language voice technologies at that time in the early 2000s. A lot of that technology, it was acquired by Microsoft, went into Cortana and others. But I was kind of feeling a little bit frustrated, and I felt like I was sort of boxed into a telecom world at the time. And I got a call from a friend of mine who I'd worked for in the UK for this company that got acquired by Sun. And he said, I'm at Dell. He's senior at Dell. He's a senior VP at Dell by this point. He says, I'm at Dell. Michael Dell wants us to build a Ferrari in his Fiat factory. And I went, okay, what are you talking about? He said, you still into gaming? I said, of course I'm still into gaming. I'm like still building my own PCs. I've got consoles. I've got the whole lot. It's like, yes, I'm absolutely into gaming. He said, well, you know what Dell products are? Well, we're going to change that. We're going to take on the boutique PC manufacturers, and Michael wants us to build the best gaming PC you've ever seen. And I want you to come over and build that team and start there. And it was to create a startup inside Dell. Michael Dell's motivation was because he was a massive gamer, huge into World of Warcraft, absolutely. And he was tired of having to use other people's PCs to play these super high-end games. So he wanted something with his name on it. And so I picked up, I moved again, jumped over to Austin, and we started what was Extreme Performance Systems that then became XPS. And XPS became the ultimate gaming brand for Dell. And it was so successful, led to us acquiring Alienware. It became its own lifestyle brand. But that for me was suddenly I was in the games industry, and just so much happened in that time I was at Dell. It just told me it's like, this is an industry I need to be in. I need to be building the technologies for it. I want to be in the environment, the people, everything about it I immediately loved. And I suddenly felt like it doesn't always have to be about building games. The game adjacent technologies, all the things that games are built on top of. And that's become my home for the last couple of decades.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, what a story. And I was just thinking about that Alienware acquisition. There's a great podcast called How I Built This. And one of the episodes is actually speaking to those Alienware founders and that whole journey of being acquired by Dell. And again, it's just one of those incredible stories. But yeah, what an entrance as well. A bit of a dream scenario. So from there, and to be fair, that only takes you up to about 17 years ago or something. Yep. So you've gone on to achieve some amazing things from there. And obviously, I would want to be diving into all of the talent lessons that you've had from the entirety. So I guess I don't want to put it and speak for you, but from there, that entry point into games has then led on to this incredible career further into you founding multiple companies, etc. So could you summarize that rest of that career journey, and then we'll dive into some lessons there?
Yep, definitely. So I spent a couple of years at Dell. It was an amazing time, incredible people, some of the brains and the approach to how you built things was fantastic. We had so much fun. But I decided I wanted to go back to Silicon Valley. And I started talking to people, and I had HP had just acquired Voodoo Gaming. They wanted me to go work on their PCs to kind of ostensibly do what I'd just done with XPS. I was talking to Google about some of the stuff that they were building early on in containers and around Docker and all those kinds of technologies. And then I got this call from just came out of the blue, and I'd happened to be back in Silicon Valley at this time just for a couple of weeks meeting people. And I got this call out of the blue from a guy called Tom Paquin. He said, "Hi, my name's Tom Paquin." And I went, and I stopped, and I was like, I know who Tom Paquin is, right? Tom Paquin was the first fellow at Netscape. He was their most senior engineer. He was about employee number 5 or 6. He was one of the founders of the Mozilla Foundation. And this guy is legend. And I'm sitting there thinking, Tom Paquin's calling me. Tom Paquin's got my number. How's this happened? And he said, Carrie Roberts tells me you're looking to move back to Silicon Valley, and I think we should talk. I went, okay. I'm in Silicon Valley. I fly back tomorrow. Are you available? He said, yeah. Let's meet this afternoon. So we did one of those classic Silicon Valley things. We met in Pete's Coffee on University Avenue. And we sat and we talked for 2 hours. And at the end of this 2 hours, amazing conversation, I just remember him saying to me, it's like, I need a director of engineering. Is it you? And I went, I still don't know what you're working on. He said, that's not really relevant right now. Is it you? And I went, okay, yes, I think it is from everything you've described. And this seems pretty exciting. He said, okay, you need to meet me 7 a.m. in the office around the corner. So he gave me the address, beautiful little sort of classic Palo Alto type office. And you get in, couldn't house more than about 12, 15 people. And 7 a.m., nobody else is in there. And he turns around this tiny little Dell Latitude laptop. And I knew this laptop. I just spent 2 years at Dell. It wasn't very powerful. And he shows it working to me, and it's running World of Warcraft. And I'm just like, that's not possible. I know that's not possible on this machine. And he said, okay, so how's it running? And I just thought about it, and I'm looking at it, and I've spent years working in networking technologies. I've been operating system teams. I just reached around the back and I unplugged the network cable and it stopped running. And he just looked at me, he said, I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed, and you're the first one to pull out the network cable. I went, well, how else is it going to get there? And I just went, where do I sign? And I flew back, and I just remember thinking, this changes everything. And I flew back to Texas. And by this point, I've got job offers from HP, from Google, and I'm feeling like, oh, this is amazing. And then all this underpaid startup role to take on the impossible and start with nothing and go see if we can build something incredible. And so I became the first head of engineering at OnLive, because it was another one of those moments where I looked at it and I couldn't say no. I said, I've got to be part of this journey. This is the future of gaming.
Yeah, and so ahead of the curve, right? Because even now in 2025, people are like, the future of gaming is streaming.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
like it's still being talked about. Like it's the future, and like you I guess you joined it OnLive. Around 2007 or something.
2007, I joined. We were 2 years in stealth mode, so we would interview people and not tell people what we were doing until we made them an offer. And then we finally came out at GDC in 2009 to show people what we were doing. And I remember at 2009, huge amount of effort putting the show on the show floor. And we had data center down about 50 miles south that everything on the show floor was running from. Nobody believed us, right? IGN was writing, telling people that this was impossible. Eurogamer, everyone is saying this isn't possible. We have people on the stand trying to sneak into our storage cupboard looking for computers there, or peeling back the carpets, looking for where the networks were running. And it's like, no, this was real. It was actually happening, and it was happening live. And it was just, it was such a, it was one of those great Silicon Valley moments, right? You hear about startups, you hear about the great reveals. It's like, here we are, and we're going to change it. And it was just amazing time, incredible atmosphere, and just the excitement in the team when all of this was going on was just insane. I mean, it was just so much fun.
That's awesome. I'm just thinking about, I'm going to be back at GDC in a few weeks' time, and I need to get on the expo floor again, like I did last year, just to wander around and chat to people and see who's, I guess, got the ambition to like do these crazy things. But yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
and so. How did that lead on to then you, I guess, fast forwarding a bit, how did that lead on to you founding Polystream then?
Yeah.
Those years later.
Lots of lessons learned. I mean, OnLive would be the front pages of all the tech and gaming press for all of the amazing stuff it was doing. And then all of a sudden one day we were the front page of the press for all the wrong reasons, and the company had just gone, and we ran out of money. And it was a terrible time. It was super painful. I was actually out at Gamescom. I'd just done some deals out there. We were signing on some new games. I was on the train coming back to London, and I remember my phone ringing, and it was our COO calling me up to say, and I'm thinking, this is a very odd time for him to be calling me up from California. And he just said, I need you to have a heads up, and I need you to get in contact with any of your team in Europe, because in about 8 hours, everyone's going to come into the office and we're going to tell them we're shutting the doors, and that's it. It's done. We've run out of money. And it was unbelievable. I just remember thinking, what's just happened? Because I knew we had some big investments in the pipe and I knew we were working on some stuff. And there's a lot of backstory. I mean, it's like you could do a whole other podcast just on what happened around that. But we called the team in, or they called the team in. I remember dialing in. I got back home by that point and just announcing that the company was shuttering. And it was the weirdest thing because the way it was presented, it was like, we're shuttering. This is it. We are out of money. Everything is gone. And you have no job as of the end of today. I got caught in a slightly weird holding pattern because we weren't employees under the US. We were an entity in Europe at this point. So we sort of had a slightly different structure and we could keep funding things. But in the US, everyone was just told they were gone. And there was this sort of moment of silence and shell shock. And then all of a sudden you hear people start clapping. And I'm thinking, why are people clapping? Because they've all just been told they've lost their jobs. But it was this sort of weird emotional reaction from this journey that had been so much a part of our lives and so intense for so long. And suddenly it's gone and everyone's just like, what do I do now? And they just started applauding and clapping. And so that was a very strange moment. And I think it leads into kind of just when you're building teams, how emotional and how you bring people with you on these journeys. And sometimes that finish can be insanely catastrophic and very emotionally painful, which it was. But there was then a very sort of rapid turnaround over a couple of weeks. And we went through an acquisition by a guy called Gary Lauder, at which point the founder of OnLive, he stepped aside. Gary Lauder took it on and he basically said, okay, I believe there's something here. He took the whole package, all the data centers, and over the next 6 weeks, we started bringing everything sort of back up and working out how we were going to take it forward. At no point did anyone stop being able to play. We kept maintaining all of this stuff in the background, incredible bit of work by the ops team and everyone. And then we ran it for another 3 years. We built a whole load of new brilliant technologies, syncing with your Steam libraries and all kinds of stuff like that. GeForce Now before GeForce Now, Stadia before Stadia, all of that stuff. And then we sold it to Sony. And I'm then sat there thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? And I get a different call. I get a call from a guy called Adam Billiard, who was one of the founders of Criterion. He was the architect of renderware. And so anyone that knows their game engine history knows how important renderware was, particularly to PlayStation. There was a time when you almost couldn't put a game onto PlayStation if you weren't using renderware. And so he called me and said, I've got a much better way of streaming. And I went, I'm not interested. I don't think we can solve this problem because it's too expensive. It's the wrong approach and we're just hitting things with a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And he said, no, you've got to come down. I need to show you something. And so I went down to his house in Hove and he showed me a little IBM laptop running rendering some graphics that was being streamed from something else. And I went, okay, but that's not that interesting still. I said, what would happen if you just ran it out of a vanilla server in Amazon? And Adam's an amazing person. He's probably he's absolutely one of the top graphics engineers in the world. There's few people that can think like that. And so he said, I don't know, that's going to be really hard. And 2 days later, he said, okay, I've got it running out of Amazon. I'm just like, drive back down, look at this thing running out of Amazon. I went, okay, let's found a company. And so we founded Polystream. And Polystream was built on the idea that you would run in the cloud, but you would render on your local device. So completely abstracting the problem, changing the dynamics of how you scale the cloud architecture. And we went on through that journey. That was an 8-year journey. And ultimately we sold into Mythical Games as a big part of the future is going to be metaverse. How do you interconnect all of these different games and experiences together? And we really saw Polystream as a foundational technology for 3D interactive internet. And that's still how we think about it today. It's a way of almost browsing, but being able to go through anything and just jump from place to place.
Yeah, amazing. And I was at EA with the Criterion team. So in talking about the history of Renderware, I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about all of the original GTA games, and I swear it was like Persona games, and like you said, it was like just the list is Rayman. That's huge. Like I said, it was and that was incredible. And also having worked in the games industry in Guildford, which if anyone's listening, they have never heard of this town before. It's just outside of London. Houses some huge companies and huge names. It has the, well, I think the phrase the Guildford folks are trying to catch on with is the Hollywood of games. Makes me laugh every time I hear that. But yeah, there you go. But yeah, that's incredible. And then on to Mythical. Still got some good friends there. But yeah, you are now in the world of EdTech. And so you've ventured back out of games for a time. And so for the last 18 months. So love to quickly hear about that as well.
Yeah, so I looked at that, and I'd known the founder. In fact, the founder's childhood friend of mine. We've known each other since we were teenagers. And he'd come through, they'd taken some investment from private equity, and they were looking to scale the business and think about their technology strategy and roadmap, and also their fundamental technologies as well. And for me, I looked at it and went, well, actually, this sort of falls into my bracket of game tech and game adjacent. It's VR. We're using Unity. We're using Mozilla Hubs and other technologies to create interactive experiences to put them in schools. And so a lot of it is built around the gamification and the interaction type of tooling, and how you take that into an education environment and you give students immersive experiences. And we know it's well studied that we learn by doing. I got my start in my career by becoming an apprentice because I didn't do great at school. But when I knew what it was I wanted to do and I could touch it and put my hands on it, it became far more tangible to me. And VR does a great job of that in a classroom setting. You can put people inside things, you can take them back through history, you can take them into space, and you can show them these incredible environments that would be very hard to replicate without obviously a lot more types of infrastructure or travel or all the rest of it. So it's really about starting those talking points and getting the kids excited to then engage. And then once they're engaged, they're having fun, and you've got them moving and going into that world. And so for me, it became part of that problem. VR, fun, building a platform that supports all of that. And I still feel very much I'm in and around the games industry still, talking to folks. We've got companies like BrainSparks, and we've got companies like Singer Studios building incredible content that are both fun but educational. And so we're seeing these big shifts, I think. And that for me is a lot of the game industry, the technologies, the capabilities aren't just about building games. They're about creating emotions and experiences. Where else do we use those? And education is a perfect example. And that for me was it was very natural to drop into that environment.
Yeah. And I think I was thinking about the Duolingo and taking all of the lessons from gamification, so game design and live ops and everything else, and applying it to learning languages and the success they've seen there. Because I often think the best thing that games industry people know how to do is build incredibly engaging, fun experiences that retain the audience. And also there's that perfect line to help them learn and increase challenges at the players or students' pace, right? So that's great. And I keep saying to people, with the state of the industry at the moment, and you might find yourself like impacted by a layoff or something. So what do you do next? It's like, well, there's plenty of other industries absolutely calling out for all of this games talent and looking for all of that innovation and taking that over there. So yeah, I love that mission of what Avantis is doing. So bringing it back to some of your previous experiences, I'm in the world at the moment with startup founders and trying to get them to talk about culture and talking about how to be more purposeful with that and to build successful businesses ultimately. I was thinking back to your two founder experiences. And to be honest, anytime that you've been in a leadership position and had the ability to shape culture. But what would you say is some of the top lessons you've learned from building these companies, building teams? I'm going to keep it as open and vague as that. So throw it back to you.
And it's a great question because, I mean, we've touched on it just from the questions you've asked me. And I've been incredibly lucky with my career and all these different places I've worked. But I can look at sort of key traits from all of those companies, going back to Sun, going back to Dell, Tell Me. And I can look at all of those things and I can say there were magical things within each of those companies. You look at Sun Microsystems, Scott McNealy was an incredible leader. He could just walk on a stage and everyone just sort of listened. And he had that kind of amazing personality where you just felt like this is somebody who I want to follow, I want to believe in. And that belief and that sort of leadership piece becomes key for any company for me. So when you look at Dell, when I talked about Michael Dell and his motivations, it was the same thing. Michael Dell had built that company himself. And it just, every part of it was built with that foundation of trust and giving people what they needed to be able to do incredible work. And so Dell, even by this point, was a big company, but it's still, you felt like when somebody gave you something, they gave it to you because they trusted you to go do it. And so that comes with a level of responsibility, but it also comes with believing why you want to do it and believing why you want to make these things succeed. Mike McHugh and Tell Me, same thing. He was had been at Netscape. He'd founded a company previously called Paper Software. So people like him, Tom Paquin and others had all been part of this sort of Silicon Valley group of, like, all through the 90s, creating all of this stuff. So Tom Paquin, Mike McHugh, people that had all been around this early 90s hyper growth of Silicon Valley, and they knew what it took to scale companies, but they also knew what it took to get people to follow a mission, to follow a journey, and to believe in what it was that they were trying to build. And I remember speaking with Mike McHugh one day, and he just said to me, like, it doesn't matter what you're trying to build, it starts with the people. And if you build a great team of people and you trust those people and you can have them around you and they believe in you and your leadership and everything you're doing, you can build anything. And it always starts with that kernel of who we are. How do we make people, make is exactly the wrong word, actually. How do we get people to want to come on a journey with us, to want to be part of something and experience it with you and take on that belief? And because then it becomes sort of throughout everyone, it becomes part of the DNA of your business. And that always became sort of however I thought about teams, when I'm talking to startups, when I'm talking to other people, when I'm building my own teams, it's always about, I'm looking for people who I can trust. If I've hired the right team of people, I'm largely not needed. I'm there to sort of take ownership of different things. I'm there to think more about strategy, look beyond. But if I've got a great team of people around me, then I shouldn't have to be sitting over them all the time. I shouldn't have to be asking these constant questions about what it is they're doing. I want them to go solve the hard problems, and I can go find those people. And so it's about how you hire people, how you bring them in, how you get them to join the journey, and how you then look after them once they're there. We talk now about things like psychological safety. Psychological safety is really that element of, can I make a mistake and still feel like I'm in a good place, that people will support me in making mistakes? Because that happens. It's how we respond to it and then how we move forward from that. So it all starts with that sort of very, very early on. Who am I? What do I want this to be? What do I want to get out of it? And how do I bring people with me? And that element of trust, belief, having them on a journey with you, knowing that whatever stage they're in that career, if they're going to join you, having empathy for them in their part of their career, understanding how they are motivated is just as important as what it is that's driving you.
Yeah, great. And when you're giving that career summary as well, you actually gave two really interesting stories on finding your founder for those companies as well. I think both of them started with, well, I got a phone call, but but talking about building trusting teams, I think, well, first of all, the most important, or at least the very first trusting team you've got to build is that founder team. And so how did you know that it was the right call to start a business with the OnLive business? And then how did you know it was the right call again for Polystream? Were there any telling signs? Was it like this gut feel chemistry thing? And if you were to advise anyone else on founding companies and finding founders, is there anything that you can actually abstract objectively from that, or is it pure subjective emotion? I don't know. Yeah.
This is, it's a really hard one. And you know this, when you're interviewing people, you never get everything you want out of an interview, right? You're never going to get all of the answers to things. And so when Tom called me, he called me and said, Carrie Roberts says I should talk to you. Now, Carrie was one of the most incredible engineers I've ever met. He designed some of the most incredible data center infrastructure and architecture. He was so detail oriented. He just had this amazingly sharp mind, and he also did not tolerate fools at all. And so he's quite a terrifying, intimidating figure to be around. And I always found, when a lot of the time I was in Silicon Valley, I found that was my environment. I was surrounded by brilliant people who scared the life out of me because they were so smart. And I never quite understood where I fitted in all of this. And it took quite a long time before I felt that I realized or I understood better. So when Carrie had given my name to Tom, I was slightly confused because I always wondered if Carrie just thought I was an idiot and didn't really know what it was that I was doing half the time, which was quite often true. Because I built a lot of this by knowing how to go find the right person to solve the problem. And that is one of my strengths. It's one of my skills. And so Carrie always liked that in me. He appreciated the fact that I could clear a path for him. I could enable him to do his job well, and I could go find resources he needed. That was something I've always been very good at. So when Carrie had given my name to Tom, right there was something, it was like, wow, Carrie's recommended me for something. And then it was Tom Paquin. So I knew of Tom Paquin, and I knew Tom's reputation. Tom's another brilliant person, career starting back at IBM in graphics design. He had worked his way all the way through. So I knew other people who had worked with him, and they all said he's just an amazing person to work for. And so I did a little bit of background. But then when I was talking to Tom, it was the way he approached questions. It was the way he teased things apart to get out of it. And so for 2 hours, I'm sat talking to this guy, not having a clue about what they're building, but super engaged in a deeply technical conversation where he's getting enough from me to understand if I can solve the problems. And I always remember that piece of it. And then I flew out back a couple of weeks later, and I walked in the room, and there were 2 other people I knew there, which I hadn't realized were working there because this company's in stealth. And they're all like, yeah, this place is crazy. You won't believe what we're working on. These were friends I was kayaking with. They were really good people. I got on really well with them. And it's like, you've got to join us, dude. You've got to come here. This is awesome. And it's like, okay, well, I can't say no to that now. And that's what I did. But from day one, Tom was like, right, this is yours. Go solve it. Come to me when you don't know what to do next. And most of my questions to Tom, and I spent years working for Tom, most of my questions to him would be something along the lines of, I don't know how to do this, or I'm stuck on this, or I can't figure my way through this. And Tom would then just ask the question, play it back to me until I'd answered the question. And he did this to me so often. And I used to go out of his office so annoyed because every single time he'd never answered the question. He'd got me to answer the question. And he was a brilliant coach and mentor, and I just loved working with him. And
is that called the? I was trying to think. Is it called the Platonic method, where you
something
answer a question with a question? Going back, just thinking back to my philosophy degree there.
Exactly, and it was just like that. And so then, having gone all through the OnLive journey, I've then got this. Someone had mentioned that Adam was working on something that I should go take a look at, and this was a guy called Chris Donahue. And Chris had said, go meet, and he'd been in the games industry for years. He knew Adam back from the Renderware days. And he said, if Adam's working on this, it's likely he's figured out a way to solve this problem. And I remember thinking, okay, we've been dealing with speed of light and physics now for 8 years. I'm not sure how we're going to solve this problem. So I go and meet Adam, and Adam showed me his approach, just threw away everything I had thought about, I'd been working on. But interestingly, his approach, when I interviewed right at the beginning at OnLive, someone had asked the question, should we render in the cloud or should we render on the client? And I remember sketching 2 architectures on the whiteboard and pointing out the pain points if we did it either way. And it was basically a pros and cons argument for whichever approach we took. And one was going to be much harder to implement, but potentially much better for scaling. One was going to be much easier to implement, and all of these were relative. We were solving insanely hard problems. But if we do it this way, it's going to be easier to just send it to any device. We're basically going to be streaming video. So we went with the streaming video approach. Well, now Adam's showing me the approach that I had originally sketched on the whiteboard 8 years previously. And that has its roots back to Unix and X11, and I kind of understood the principles of it. And I just went, if we can do it this way, we solve all the problems I've been working on for the last 8 years. And that led to us, and we went back and forth. We must have spent about 6-8 weeks just basically driving backwards and forwards between each other's houses, whiteboards, sketching, talking to each other, going through. And then ultimately, it was like, yeah, we should be founding this company. We need to make this work, because we were yin and yang, right? I had that breadth where I can solve who to hire next, and he has that depth where he can just go so deep into a problem that we can take it and we can solve it, and we just knew instantly. And Adam is one of my best friends, and it was amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for the answers there. I think it sounds like a bit of both, really. Perhaps, that obviously the chemistry's there, and you were convinced this is a talented person with a vision. At the same time, you knew they could back it up with the experience and the skills and everything. It's not just pure hope and dreams that you're hoping to start a business. I've got two more questions for you. And this first one, so this first one would be, do you think that you always had an itch to be a founder? And even way back in the earliest of your career, do you always feel like that was there? Or was it just that happenstance, you found a great person, there was a great idea, and you're like, let's do this, and it was a bit out of the blue?
I don't know that I had gone out of my way to be a founder, but apparently that I've lived in this world for long enough and had enough of that DNA that it was kind of, in some ways, almost inevitable. So quite a long time ago, probably mid-2000s, CNBC wrote an article about Tell Me and said, most people will never have heard of Tell Me. And yet Tell Me, by this point, about 250 employees, and this maybe a couple of years later, about 250 employees, has spawned out more founders than you could ever begin to imagine. And it's because Tell Me was built on that can-do attitude. It was built on bringing just huge numbers of people together that want to solve problems, and they're not prepared to sit back. They want to make these things happen, which is kind of part and parcel of the DNA journey, of the startup journey, sorry. And so within all of that, you look at it and you go back, well, here's a company of 250 people, and about 50 of them have gone on to found their own businesses, myself included, which is an insane number when you think about it. So in some ways, you look back then and go, I don't know when it was going to happen, but clearly there was something that it was going to happen as soon as the stars aligned. And with Adam, that happened to be that moment of stars aligning. And people have said this to me recently. They've said, having been that, do you want to go start another company? Do you still have that itch? And it's one of those I learned from the California question of, I'm never going to go to California. I'm never going to live there. And then a year later, I'm living there. It's like, I can't say never, right? If I meet the right person solving the right problem and that match is there, sure, I'm probably going to end up doing something again. And it's because I'm not scared of it. I just, for me, it's that it comes into that. Is it an environment that you can foster to make something great happen? And do you believe in it? And if you do, that becomes the driving motivation for being a founder. But I'm just as wired to solve that problem as kind of what I did at Dell, where it's like brought in to solve a problem that the company wasn't really wired for at that time. It was built to sell high volume, low touch products. And here we were building a low volume, high touch problem that had to delight, had to bring joy to its users, out of box experience, everything that wasn't part of how Dell approached it. And so that really was it was a startup environment. We had to strip down every process and put it back together again to make that happen. And I think I've got as much joy of building a team from 5 to 100 as I have from starting something myself. It's about people, finding great people, working on great problems. And that's what drives me.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And we have now run up on time, the end of the podcast. I've absolutely loved hearing all of your stories about your career, all of the companies you founded, how to find a great founder in those, how to create psychological safety, build trusting teams and companies, and all of the lessons that you've shared. That was amazing. and all within, I guess, the last 45 minutes, which was pretty impressive. So my last question for you, though, is what is your favorite interview question?
I've gone backwards and forwards over this quite a few times over the years. I lived in Silicon Valley, where everyone was trying to ask you how many ping pong balls to put in a jumbo jet and all the rest of those insane questions. And you start to look at them and go, what am I trying to solve here? And I realized a lot more of it came back to what am I looking for? I'm looking for someone that can fit the team. I want to understand how they think about things, but I'm not trying to solve something that's so abstract it causes someone to freeze in the moment. And for quite a while, I started asking people, I had a question I was asking people quite regularly, which is, I give you $1 billion, what do you do with it? And I tested it for a little while, and I tested it across a whole swathe of people, and it didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. I found some people gave me absolutely brilliant answers. A friend of mine gave me the best answer, which is, that is more money than anyone can really ever deal with. And so if I'm going to spend that money, I know I can make myself comfortable for the rest of the life, and I'm still going to have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars left over. So what do I do with it? And so his thinking was, I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at all of these things that over the years we have based foundations of science on, foundations of thinking on, and I'm going to retest them, because we get stuck in a rut of, once we think we've got the answer to it, then we don't go back and retest that answer. And so a surprising amount of our science is based on things that were answered 300 years ago, and maybe we should go back and retest some of those just to make sure. No one's ever going to fund you for doing that, was his point. So it wouldn't be a bad thing to just go double check our homework for some of these. And I thought that was a great answer, and it sort of moved me on. But I was also tired of getting I'm going to buy all my family a house, and then I'm going to put some away for retirement. And I'm just like, what? It's $1 billion. How many houses are you going to buy? I kind of gave up on that one and decided that wasn't really taking me where I was going. So one of my still favorite is, what's something you've done that wasn't work-wise? I prefer this one to be a work one. I'm looking for an absolute clanger that you've made at work, and I try and use sort of the more fun language. What's an absolute clanger you've made at work, and then what did you do next, or what happened next? I'm not looking for someone to tell me about the multi-million fraud they got involved in or any of those kinds of things. I think if you phrase it right, you're trying to get people to give you those fun moments where it's like, yeah, this was a bit of a dumb move, but here's how we solved it and this is what's happened next. And I almost don't care what it was. I care more about how they tell the story and how they engage and how they start to open up. And do they think of this as actually, that was kind of fun and I learned this from it. And I've always found that's a good one for opening things up. And then I also ask people to sort of give me a little bit more insight as to what they're passionate about outside of work, because I'm looking for what it is that's driving people. Over the years, I've met so many engineers and developers who have told me, well, at home, I love programming, but I'm just programming something over here instead of something for work. And it's like, I'm okay with that, but it's driving them. It's their passion. And it gives you a sort of foundational point. It might be wine, it might be food, it might be travel, any of those things. But it's unlocking that person to start being a little bit more open, because that's the person you're going to be working with. And that's what I'm trying to find out. So I tend to now look a little bit more at those questions that sort of give me a little bit more about who you are, not the question I've asked. And then I always finish with, give me a question. What's the question you wish you'd asked me that you haven't yet and we haven't had time to? And I always make sure I've left time in for the end of that. And I give them a little bit more opening there. And then I always finish with my email address. They have my email address because we've been connected. And I remind them that they're going to go away and they'll probably have thought of something they wish they'd asked me. Please ask me. Reach out to me on email, LinkedIn, whatever, but connect with me, come back to me. Don't think we've done this conversation if you've gone away and gone, oh, I wish I'd asked that. And that's often resulted in many questions coming back to me over the years.
That's quite a few good questions in there, and I like the thinking and the logic, especially using the word clanger in there, which for the non-British folks that just means, I guess, somewhere similar to a blunder or a mistake. But I think it is quite subtle. I quite like that. If you say failure or mistake, that's quite an intense, very negative phrases. Using that is a bit more colloquial and a bit more relaxed, and you're asking people to open up and almost be a bit self-deprecating about that. I really, it's a subtle but like important difference in that interview questioning. So I like that. That's where the learnings happen, right? It's it's a great follow-on to find out about people's passions and drivers. And I agree in your last point, which is I'm always judging people in interviews about the quality of the questions they ask me. That's definitely every time. The red flag is, I have no questions. I'm like, okay, where's the intellectual curiosity? But I like the openness and handing out the email and saying let's continue that conversation. I love that too, in terms of making someone feel relaxed and have a genuine connection with someone. I think that's really important, both how you open that, open that conversation and close it. Great. Yep. Fantastic.
And you just used one of my favorite words. That's something I'm always looking for in people. Curiosity. Curiosity drives just so much. And when you've got curious people, that's how you know you're going to solve the hard problems. And that's one of the things I'm always looking for.
Yeah, curiosity paired with that proactiveness. Like, that's it, doing that philosophy degree. It's like, you could sit there and ponder the universe all day, but you're actually going to go out there and experiment and find those answers you want. I love it. Bruce, this was so much fun. Feel like I've learned a lot. And so thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your stories with me. I really appreciate it.
Joe, I've had a great time. I love it. And it's been a lot of fun. So thank you.